Hi, welcome to Office Hours. I'm Nate Lesnosky, Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and today we're going to be talking about ways that you know if your Azure environment has been set up properly. This is a pretty frequent question that I get from executives: is how do I know if my environment is set up in a way that's appropriate? How do I ask some questions of my IT team that are sort of tells as to whether or not I'm in a good position or not? And how do I get those questions through in a way that help them to be able to make intelligent decisions going forward? So we're going to cover those ways today, and hopefully it helps inform you as to how you can help steward your cloud environment forward in a positive direction. So let's start with number one. So number one is you need an ability to translate business services into cloud spend and cloud spend into business services. You need to be able to understand the relationship between what's spent within the Azure environment or cloud environment in general and the value that it's generating within the organization. And this is something that's very often forgotten about when people start adopting the cloud. They start moving resources there, they put them in a position where they're starting to tinker with things, or they're launching new applications and they're bringing them to the table, and they appreciate the agility of launching new services. They appreciate and sort of know in their heart that they need to be doing work in the cloud and data and apps and so on. Or they're trying to get out of the data center business, and that's where sometimes the financial question comes up. But what they really overlook is this relationship between the end business goal that we're serving, its ROI, and whether or not the end business goal relates directly in a positive way to the spend that's going on. Giving ourselves the ability to be able to slice and dice the spend in a way that helps me to understand that the spend is worthwhile and it's being translated into business value and ROI, or the spend is not worthwhile and it's something actually cut. And when you don't give yourself the ability to be able to make intelligent decisions in that space, it's difficult to be able to really answer the question of, hey, my Azure costs are going up month over month, Mr. Business Person. Are those worthwhile costs? Is this providing value? Should I be cutting it? On the flip side, you could translate that into business value and say, yeah, like I'm translating this dollars into this value and this ROI. So number one thing you should ask yourself beyond anything else when you're looking at your cloud environment is, can I translate that spend into value? Second thing is really a security question. Is, have I segmented my workloads in a way that facilitates each workload talking to only the things it should talk to? Another way to think about this is called micro-segmentation. This idea that anything I've put in the cloud should be isolated from the other things that are put in the cloud or on-premise. In our on-premise environments, usually micro-segmentation hasn't been a thing. We've put everything in one big pool, I guess you'd say. And everything in that pool can talk to everything else in that pool. And when resources are moved to the cloud, we have this opportunity, whether they're new modern workloads or they are legacy workloads that we're moving to cloud, to be able to isolate those resources for network access and individual users who shouldn't be accessing those resources in a way that allows us to be able to much better segment the environment for security purposes, for access purposes, for just ensuring the right people have access to the right things and the wrong people don't have access to things that they shouldn't have access to. So the big question there is, especially for companies that have migrated established estates into the cloud, is, have I micro-segmented my workloads that I've moved to Azure? And are they isolated from the other workloads that I've moved to Azure? And most companies, unfortunately, have made a poor decision on that front, and they move their workloads and they haven't micro-segmented. They kind of lost that opportunity to be able to enhance the security of the estate. So that's another big question that you should be asking. Third question here. Third question is, have I built pipelines for the environments I've deployed into the cloud? For any modern workload, this should be obvious. Modern workloads are built on the idea of pipelines, the idea that my known good configuration lives in a repository, and that repository is version controlled. So you should say, have I version controlled the known good configuration of what I have built? If I have, then I have an ability to redeploy that configuration out into my cloud environment. If I haven't, then it's just as good as whatever I had clicked on last. And it puts me in a position where if someone messes up that environment, it's difficult for me to move back to what the known good configuration was. So the goal behind building pipelines is establish confidence in the operational state of the thing. Whether it's an app or a data environment or an AI workload or even a virtual machine that you've moved from your on-premises environment into the cloud, if you have built pipelines that allows you to be able to say, what I've moved to the cloud has a known good configuration. And if that configuration changes, I can move back to what the old configuration was. And it's particularly important in the cloud because the cloud is substantially more complicated than what might exist in your on-premises environment. And it's a point in time where you can eliminate some of the flaws that existed in the way people deployed on-premises environments, especially from a configuration management standpoint. So building out pipelines associated with any workload in the cloud, especially the dev, QA, prod state, not so much the sandbox, more so especially the production, is where you put yourself in a position to be able to have confidence in the operational state of the environment. Fourth thing would be, do your admins require multi-factor authentication and conditional access surrounding the environment? Are they in a position where if my account is compromised, I have some additional controls around that account that facilitate me having the right kind of access to the environment, that facilitate, if I have that account compromised, that only me with my second form of authentication can access the environment. Or with my username and password, can I get into your Azure environment and start messing around and tinkering around? Interesting thing is that a large majority of Azure environments do not have multi-factor authentication enabled. What that means is that the only thing protecting most Azure environments is the username and password that the person used to be able to set it up. Now that's a really big problem because as we know, usernames and passwords are pretty insecure. So if you were gonna do one thing from a security perspective, it's really to make sure that the owner rights associated with your Azure environment are protected with multi-factor authentication. Now that's a relatively low bar. It's not that hard to get this set up, and it's something that comes right along with most of the identity spots that you're configuring for your Azure environment. Now, building on top of that is the idea of additional conditions to your access. Now, conditional access, the term, really just means that there's conditions to your access, right? Your first condition would be your username and password. Second condition might be multi-factor authentication. But other conditions might be like, I need to be on a healthy computer. I need to be on a computer that hasn't been compromised. I need to be in an environment that is appropriate for me to be accessing this. Maybe I can be from certain locations, or maybe I should be only accessing it for certain types of criteria, or my device has to be configured in a particular way. So what that does is it layers on these additional controls. So I need to be who I say I am. I need to be on a device that's managed. I need to be on a healthy device. And all those things are what you'd want if a person is accessing and administrating your Azure environment. Very, very important, because it puts you in a position to be able to ensure that the right people are accessing the right things, but not only just the right people, but also people that are operating from a place in a sort of health state on the device that is something that should be using those credentials. And that puts me in a much better position to be able to dictate the terms of the identity and access associated with my Azure environment. So it'd be idea number 4. So idea number 5 would be to implement policies that are associated with the needs that you have within the environment. So I'll give you an example here. So an example would be everything in your environment should be tagged. So it should be tagged with cost centers that allow you to do your cost controls. And what you would use to be able to ensure that that happens is by using Azure Policy to be able to enforce tagging associated with the environment. So Azure Policy is what really lets you translate the written policies of the organization, the policies that are important to your organization, translating those into technical policies that then implement that within the environment. So those technical policies are really a way for you to ensure that what's important to you, tagging, maybe security controls, maybe the locations that certain things can be deployed, maybe the size of things that can be deployed, certain cost vectors that you might apply. Let's say, like, I don't want you to deploy this size of virtual machine. There's no real reason for us to be doing that. And if you were going to do it, I'd want you to get special approval. So that might be applying. Maybe it's the location of the virtual machines in the context of the resource group and the network security group. Maybe it's ensuring they're backed up. All these kinds of things that are super, super important to operate an environment need to be translated from the thought policy, the like written down word policy, to an actual implementation in Azure policy in your environment. And that's not particularly difficult to do, but it is something that a lot of companies have outstanding. A lot of companies I look at, they've got many millions of Azure spend, but they haven't translated that spend into the cost challenge that we talked about earlier, and they haven't locked down those elements with Azure policy that indicates that the things that are deployed match what their actual policies are. And then kind of retroactively fixing that can be really complicated, because now you're in a position where you can't apply a policy and say, in order to get in the door, you need to be able to have these things applied. You have to actually go back out and then apply a policy in audit mode, determine what everything's state is, and then kind of go through this process of fixing it, which makes a much bigger challenge for you as you go about going through the sort of adoption and the governance challenge that's associated with bringing in Azure resources. So one of the things I really stress on is, as you're onboarding resources in your environment, ensure that prior to those resources coming in, these governance rules have been implemented. And that puts you in a much better position to be able to say, when you enter in the door, these are the things that you need. So then the other things I need to do, like, okay, cool, I'm able to do the cost management exercise. I'm able to know that I did the security exercise that I needed. I'm able to validate I did backups and recovery and updates. All these things are controlled and understood because I put it right into my policy. Okay, last thing would be the question to ask is, what does my enablement approach look like? So am I, as an organization, building a structured onboarding package that allows for application teams or data teams to be able to onboard into my Azure environment and do so in a way that enables them to be successful, but also enables them to understand the responsibilities they have once they've onboarded into the cloud? And if they've done that, then I can train them, I can onboard them, I can help them be successful and put them in a position where they can really accelerate their work, and where I can scale usage of the cloud, but usage of the cloud in an appropriate way that's tied to business needs, that's tied to business payoff as a result of my enablement efforts. So the most highly functioning organizations are those that have that cloud enablement team that does two things. It does the governance function, and then it also has a true enablement function of working with application teams to help them come into the cloud environment successfully and to be able to get done the things they need to get done. And applying the necessary controls via policy, security, etc., but then also letting them know that if you operate within these guardrails, you're going to be really successful within our environment, and you're going to be able to generate value for our organization. And that's really, at the end of the day, our goal. We want value attached to the right spend, attached to the right controls that keep us safe. And if we can do that, then scale it all day, right? Get people using the cloud to generate more opportunity for your business, but do so in an appropriate way that drives the necessary value and puts you in a position to be successful, and them in a position to be successful in a complementary way, versus a way where they're just kind of off doing their own thing because there wasn't effective onboarding, or because they didn't understand why they need to be doing things within a certain context. All right, so those are my 6 things to be asking of an organization. Again, let's kind of cover one more time. Ability to translate the business service spend back to the cloud spend, and in reverse, the cloud spend to the business services. We want to know that our workloads have been micro-segmented. We have the appropriate security controls in place. We want to know a pipeline exists for our critical environments, so we know that we have stability and operational consistency. We want to know that our admins have multi-factor authentication and conditional access applied. We want to know that we have policies that enforce our critical governance and security controls. And then finally, we want to know that we have an effective enablement strategy. That the enablement strategy is tied into those other goals. All right. Thank you for stopping by. This was really fun. Love talking through this. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to get better at operating the cloud, especially as leaders that need to ask these questions of our organizations and make sure that we're pressing forward on doing this right. I'm Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and looking forward to having you in the office next time.